Doesn't seem to be on.
Live anyway. Let's see. Oh, oh no.
Aha! Yes, I think we are live now. Yes.
Hey.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to close it so it doesn't make an echo. Exciting. I think
That is exciting. Woohoo! Right. Okay, I shall introduce everyone and then hopefully it will do what it needs to do. Right, so welcome everyone. This is the first time you may have noticed that I have done a live stream via Zoom. So apologies to everyone who's watching and to Eloise. Technology is not for me, but I'm trying really hard. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Natasha from Chicken and Frog Bookshop. We're an independent children's bookshop in Brentwood. And this lovely lady is Eloise Rickman, also known as Mighty Mother. I've got to say, I love that name. I think that's absolutely brilliant. You've got 22,000 followers on Instagram, which is insane. That's just amazing, which I think is testament to the fact that what you do and the things that you have to say are really important and that people want to hear your point of view. And I think you do it in such a gentle, kind way that's why people enjoy kind of that experience. So
I hope
you. Thank you for that, because I just think that's fantastic. So I think your book couldn't have come out at a better time with everything that's going on at the moment. So Eloise's new book, Extraordinary Parenting, I will let Eloise explain about it in a bit more detail. But I think with lots of families kind of being thrown into the foray of homeschooling and how to juggle family life and work life, and all of a sudden they're not separated, it's a lot. So we've just been chatting off of this about the fact that it is a lot, and Eloise has got lots of great insights and experiences of her own which she's going to share. So if you've got any questions at all, you can message, and we will have a bit of a Q&A at the end. Hopefully it will all behave itself. Now I think, Eloise, that I can hide myself, but that may not be true either. I might just put myself in the corner like that, actually. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
And I'll hand over to you, my lovely.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I guess I'll tell you a little bit about myself and also why I came to write Extraordinary Parenting. So for those of you who don't know me, hello, I'm Eloise, and I live in South London with my husband Sam and our daughter Frida. And Frida is 5 years old and she is also home educated. And we have known from pretty early on that we wanted to homeschool her. So it's always been a part of our plan, our hopes. And so I also work as a parent educator. I never know what to call myself, but I think a parent educator makes the most sense. And so I work with parents all over the world through online courses. I run online courses on kind of early years education, on home education, and on peaceful parenting, respectful, gentle parenting. And I also work with parents one-to-one as well. And so that has been apparently a skill set which, when lockdown was announced, suddenly became very in demand. And all of a sudden, I felt like my inbox was overflowing with messages from parents saying, what do I do? You know, and I've heard from so many parents who were suddenly thrust into the deep end, like Natasha was saying, of suddenly having to balance working either out of a home or from home, with suddenly having your children out of nursery or out of school and trying to make this work, all whilst also navigating the landscape of a global health pandemic, which I think has added hugely to people's stress and anxiety levels, and you know, even just the stresses of like, how am I going to get my groceries for a week, you know, booking online delivery slots or navigating going to a supermarket, picking up prescriptions. It felt like suddenly life became a lot to deal with for, I think, pretty much every family in the country. And I really asked myself, when this started to become obvious that this was not going to be something which was going to, you know, end overnight, And when it became clear that it was going to be a case of schools shutting, nursery shutting, people possibly having to work from home, not just for a period of weeks, but for periods of months, I really dug in and asked myself, okay, how do I show up and serve my community, my clients, the people that I work with and support? And I was seeing a lot of online information. I don't know if you found this too, but I found that especially when we were at the start of COVID, you know, we were unsure about what the rules and regulations were. The government were making new updates every day. Everyone was kind of, you know, waiting to find out what was going to happen next, what we were allowed to do, what we weren't allowed to do. It felt like there was such a deluge of online information that although my first instinct was, oh, I'll do a series of blog posts or something, I felt like personally I wanted to be spending less time online on social media, consuming small bitty pieces of content, because, you know, and there's actually really good research showing this to be the case. But I think for so many people, when we consume so much news and social media content all the time, it can leave us feeling really stressed and exhausted and quite kind of intellectually and emotionally burnt out. So I asked myself, okay, well, how do I, if I don't want to contribute to this kind of, you know, online noise around this situation, what do I do? What can I offer? And as you can see by the bookshelves behind me, I'm somebody who relies on books to get me through situations, whether it's something I want to learn about or whether it's, you know, going through a hard time. And I really felt like what was missing was an accessible book, essentially something which would be able to support parents, not just in the here and now. You know, I think it was important to me, but I didn't write, you know, a parent's guide to COVID, because hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have a vaccine soon, and, you know, things will, I really, really hope, start getting better quite soon. But I think that even without COVID, we are, and this is such a cliche, but we're navigating, you know, an uncertain landscape. You know, friends in Australia have been dealing with bushfires, which have been, you know, unlike any which have been seen in memory. We have got, you know, the uncertainty that comes with economic ups and downs. There are so many families I speak to who even just, you know, the process of having a new baby leaves them feeling like life is very different for a small amount of time. Their world becomes smaller, they stay at home more. I've spoken to people like military families who, again, you know, might have to move across the country and rebuild their lives over and over again. So I really wanted to write something which would speak not just to families experiencing the current situation with regards to COVID, but actually families who are experiencing sort of any sense of uncertainty or unpredictability in their lives. And although it's called it's Extraordinary Parenting, the Essential Guide to Parenting and Educating at Home, it's not really a book about home education. There's a chapter in there around how we can encourage our children's natural propensity to learn, but really it's a parenting book more than it is a book about education. And for me, you know, as a home educating parent, those things are so intertwined anyway, and I think they probably are for most home educators. We don't just create school in our home and put on a teacher hat for 5 hours a day. Teaching and parenting and living and exploring and building a relationship together, for me, these are one and the same thing. I feel like you can't be an effective home educator if you don't have a strong relationship with your child. That has to come first for me. But it's also important, and this is why I dedicated one of the chapters in my book to it, that not only do we focus on our relationship with our children, but we also take care of ourselves. Because what I've seen increasingly, especially now that coronavirus has really changed, I think, the way so many of us live our daily lives, is that we have mothers, and I think it is still, unfortunately, mothers suddenly bearing even greater emotional, physical, practical loads. And I've spoken to so many women who have had to take a step back from their work or push all of their work to evenings and weekends, getting up early, going to bed late, whilst also navigating possibly, you know, quite strange, uncharted territories in terms of home educating children all of a sudden, maybe navigating, helping children deal with schoolwork. And, you know, also then all of that load we were talking about before, making sure you've got your Sainsbury's delivery slot, or making sure that you're popping around to check on your elderly neighbour and making sure that they have what they need. So it was really important to me that I didn't just talk about our responsibilities to our children, but also how we can take care of ourselves in these times. Because again, it's such an overused analogy, but this idea that if we don't put your own oxygen mask on first, nobody benefits. And if we as parents burn out and crash, actually that doesn't serve anybody at all. But when we're able to take care of ourselves, we can take care of our families and those around us, and we can look after ourselves as well. You know, I really believe that we're not just worth taking care of in relation to our kids, but because we are, you know, humans who deserve good treatment in and of ourselves. So I really wanted to write something which would be encouraging, reassuring, practical and realistic. It felt like suddenly a lot of the parenting advice I was seeing is still very good advice, but it doesn't fit with our narrative and our realities at the moment. All of a sudden, maybe we're not relying on grandparents to support us with babysitting, or, you know, we are rethinking radically how we want to live our lives, the kind of pace we want to live at. Do we still need to, you know, do all of the things that we thought were so important before, all of the clubs and classes and activities and spending we were doing? So there's also a bit of a kind of a plea in the book to consider how we're living our lives. Are we living in accordance with the things that are really important to us or not? And I think that what this crisis has done, although I don't agree necessarily with the people who are calling it an opportunity, I think that is, you know, a little crass and insensitive, but I think there is something around, you know, so many parents I speak to are rethinking how they live their lives and how they want to raise and educate their children. And I've seen so many, I was just speaking to Natasha before we went live, the fact that I've spoken to so many parents who are all of a sudden having a bit of a taste of what it might be like to home educate their children, and who are excited to take that forward and maybe do it long term. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process writing this book in lockdown. I think usually it takes about 2 years for a book to be published from kind of start to finish, and me and my publishers did it in just under 2 months. So it's been quite a whirlwind experience writing a book in, you know, around a fortnight. But I'm really proud, and I think we did a good job on it, and I really hope people will enjoy it. So yeah, that's a potted explanation of what extraordinary parenting is all about. I can't hear you, Natasha.
No, I thought I unmuted myself now. Right. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. I think it will just still be you on the screen, which is probably far better. So I'm just a disembodied voice for everybody else at the moment. So if you've got any questions, please do message them over via Facebook, and I can put them to Eloise. So I've just got a couple, Eloise, to just kind of get things going. And you've kind of touched on it already a little bit, but do you think that the current situation as it stands, and I'm not just talking about COVID, but obviously recently with everything that's happened in America over the last couple of days, we've seen a massive knock-on effect very, very quickly in the bookshop of how people want to educate their children, that maybe in ways that they hadn't really thought about before, which could only be a positive out of a horrible situation. Do you feel that this is going to have a kind of a far-reaching or maybe a long-lasting impact on family?
I really hope so. I mean, I think what we've seen coming out of America, but, you know, obviously it's not just an American problem. You know, it's been you know, an issue which has been going on for, you know, hundreds of years, not longer. I really, really hope that people like us, you know, white families, are really waking up to the fact that we have a really important moral obligation to do what we can to dismantle white supremacy in our homes, in our families, in our communities, and finally show up in a way that really works to, yeah, dismantle those racist structures that I think we're all complicit in one way or another. And I think I take a lot of heart from hearing so many families suddenly, you know, have their eyes open to this and say, you know, we want to do better. And I think we have a long way to go. And I think it's important to remember that often with these things, you know, there becomes a news headline and everyone gets on board, and then the news headlines die down and people realize that actually having these difficult conversations with ourselves and with our friends and family about race and prejudice and inequality is quite difficult. And so I hope that, you know, we can support one another as a community to keep doing this really hard and really necessary work. I think that one of the really big issues here in the UK is that our curriculum doesn't reflect, I think, our rich Black history in the UK. You know, when we talk about Black history, it's in relation to things like slavery. And I think that, you know, having a far-reaching, wide, diverse Black curriculum with important Black writers given prominence in, you know, the literature we speak of as well, you know, not just in terms of history, but in terms of poetry and art and music, is really important. But I think, with my cynical hat on, that although there are lots of petitions, I think it will probably take a long time for that change to happen. So as a home educating parent, it's really important to me that our homeschool reflects this diversity and reflects this need for social change. But I think that for any parents, even if your child goes to school, we all need to be doing this work for our children. We can't just leave it down to the school and say, well, they didn't teach my child. You know, we know that they're probably not going to teach our children. So we need to be having those conversations. We need to be reading those books of our children. We need to be having those challenging conversations with one another. And I think we all need to be pushing back on schools as well. So I do feel hopeful that, you know, at least with social media now, it's so much easier than ever before to educate yourself on these issues. We have Google now, you know, there are so many ways. But I do feel that, you know, going deep into these real deep issues of racism and structural inequality is something that we all need to be doing at home, rather than waiting for someone else to come and do it for us.
Yeah, no, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I mean, I said to you as well before we went live, I've been teaching for 24 years. I was very, very young when I started. And, you know, the most we ever did, and I taught in Newham as well, which is obviously a hugely diverse area. So it was better there, I think, because we used to do a lot around local history and people that were relevant to the children that we taught. But really, it was very much compartmentalized into Black History Month, which I always felt really incredibly uncomfortable and angry about, because why is it just 1 month? Why isn't it just part of, well, it is part of British history. It's part of our culture. We are a melting pot of loads of different cultures. To kind of do a soundbite and celebration, if you like, for a couple of weeks,
Yeah,
it's not enough. That's not, because it's still then making Black other rather than part of the, you know, part of the whole. So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I could rant about that for ages. I haven't got any other questions coming up yet. Come on, people. But so I've got another one. And this is a kind of tricky one, but just we get quite a few families that have decided to home educate, or they've been doing it for a long time, and they quite often come to us for support as well. It's really interesting when you're a bookseller that, I don't know, people think that you know everything, which I don't. But do you feel that there is enough support out there for families who choose to home educate? Because it's massive, isn't it? It's a lot to take on. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
Do you feel that there's enough out there to kind of guide you in the right direction, or is it very much finding things out for yourself?
I think it depends on so many different factors. So I think it depends a lot on why you are home educating and your motivation for it. So I think that, for example, there are lots of families who, like me, choose to home educate from the start. And I think that often we fall into a pretty privileged bunch. You know, we've been able to make that decision for ourselves. And we've usually had, by the time our child is of compulsory schooling age, we've had years to do our research and dig in and find community. And so I think actually, again, you know, the internet at the moment is just a treasure trove. There are so many blogs and Facebook groups. Definitely Facebook groups are a good way to go if you're trying to find community, but so many amazing books as well, especially coming out of the US, which is, I think, further along than we are in terms of homeschooling culture. So there are so many resources. I think where it becomes trickier is if you're a family who has felt, for whatever reason, you know, maybe it's that you haven't had enough support with your child who has special educational needs, possibly your child has been a victim of severe bullying, maybe your child was just really unhappy in school. And I think there are increasing numbers of families like those as well who are, for one reason or another, being pushed or forced out of schools. And I think there the support can be really patchy, because often it's not a choice that those families have decided to make for themselves. So they haven't had those years of, you know, daydreaming and reading and researching and kind of nerding out about homeschool styles. Often these are families who really haven't had their lives set up for it yet. And I think that can take time. And I think, again, you know, there are really supportive groups online. And I think it depends which local authority you live in. I think some local authority homeschooling kind of liaison officers are amazing. Some, I think, are less amazing. I think it really depends on luck of the draw, what resources you have sort of locally available to you. And I think that is a real issue, actually, that I think a lot of families sort of fall through the net in that particular instance, where they're suddenly taking on a huge amount of work for their child, especially if your child has come out of school not just at the age of 5, 6 or 7, but maybe you have a child who comes out of school halfway through their GCSEs, or, you know, at a time where they really need some support. I think what I would say to any family who finds themselves in that situation of unplanned home education would be, first, remember that education isn't an emergency. Even if your child is in the middle of doing exams, you can always afford to take a little bit of time. And I think the longer your child has been in the schooling system, probably the more time they need to readjust. So I wouldn't start, you know, they finish on a Friday and Monday you're there with a timetable. I would try and really have some time to, we call it deschooling in the homeschooling world. You know, remember that actually your child will learn without being taught. It's just finding ways to spark their natural curiosity and learning and engagement again. And I think something that unfortunately I've heard so many times from families who have children in the school system is that, you know, my child doesn't like learning, my child doesn't want me to teach them, my child doesn't like school. But I think that all children love learning. It's just sometimes it doesn't look like school learning. So giving them that space to rediscover that spark of what they enjoy. And so this is what I talk about in Extraordinary Parenting. I don't give a curriculum or a method to follow, but I talk a lot about how you can help your child, you know, find the passion that they have, finding flow in something. And it might be that you have a child who finds their flow in maths or physics, but it might be that you have a child who finds flow in writing rap or poetry, or in painting, or in designing clothes, or in hairdressing. And giving your child that space, I think, to find what it is that lights them up is really important. But don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. I think any homeschooling community on Facebook, or, you know, reaching out to homeschooling blogs, following homeschoolers on Instagram, although I would say it can be easy to fall into a comparison trap. Actually, you know, homeschoolers as a bunch tend to be pretty friendly. And I know that if someone came to our local homeschooling community and said, help, I've just deregistered my child, I know that we would, you know, I think be really supportive and want to offer as much guidance and support as that person needed. So it's really tricky. And I think I would love to see more, more interconnectivity, I think, between the kind of intentional homeschoolers. We tend to be a pretty nerdy bunch who love planning and have read 50 books on education, and, you know, and those families who maybe have been in some way failed or not served by the school system. And I think finding more kind of, more ways to join together in community. But I also really hope, and this is probably a big hope, but I really hope that some of maybe the impact that coronavirus has had, you know, already we're seeing children going back to school with smaller class sizes and going back, you know, a couple of days a week, for example, rather than full time. And I know that so many parents out there would love to, for example, flexi school their children, where they only go to school 3 days a week and then are at home the other 2 days. And I know it's harder from a school perspective, but I really do wonder if, just as I hope we'll see a shift to more flexible working arrangements after this, we might see a shift to more flexible schooling arrangements where those barriers between schooled and homeschooled start to merge, because I think that, you know, as homeschoolers, we still have a duty to our communities, which means a duty to our school systems. And I think, you know, actually we can all learn so much from one another. So I think that distinction can sometimes be unhealthy and unhelpful. And I would really like to, you know, possibly not right now, but in the future, it's definitely something I would like to look into more in terms of how we can bridge that gap.
Oh, it's brilliant. Thank you. So we've got a question from John Duran, who I think read my mind because I'd already written something down. So thank you, John. He wanted to know a little bit more about, you talk about peaceful parenting, and to kind of talk about that a bit more. He said to have a quieter household so there's less shouting between siblings with 5 and 6. And we've got a message from Jo as well along similar ground, who's just found herself in a situation of trying to homeschool but doesn't want to turn it into a battleground. We've certainly found that a lot. We're getting lots of people saying, oh, this is you know, it's really hard, because as you say, you've planned it, that was your intention, but lots of families are just finding themselves suddenly in this situation, and they maybe don't have the resources, and the children haven't got those expectations. I mean, I know as a teacher of a long time, I never taught my own kids anything. You know, I just, because I made the decision to send them to school, and they could all read before they went to school, but really because they wanted to. And people would often go, oh, you know, they're bright because you're a teacher. No, I can honestly say, being a mum and being a teacher, for me anyway, have been very separate things. And I think to do what you do, to kind of put those two things together, is a really difficult balancing act. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that kind of peaceful parenting and how you get that equilibrium right, that'd be great.
So maybe what I'll do is I'll talk about Jo's question first, and then we can kind of move on to John's a little bit more. So I think in terms of, you know, how to bridge that gap between being parent and teacher, I think essentially, especially if you're only homeschooling for a short amount of time, but even if you're homeschooling long term, I think essentially you don't try and be their teacher. Which I know is a very radical idea. And I know that there are some homeschoolers who very much do see themselves as teachers. But for me, I feel like if I sat down and tried to, you know, actively teach my daughter all the time, even though she's never been in school, I feel she would really push back. And I think that it's worse if your child has already been in school, that sense of you're not my teacher, and maybe you're trying to explain things to them, but you're not doing it in the way that their teacher would explain it. And I can remember, you know, when I was at school, my parents sometimes trying to help me with my homework, and I just found it enraging because they didn't really get it. They didn't do it like my teacher did it. My teacher was much better at explaining it. So I think where possible, you know, trying to take your foot off the gas. And it depends again how old your children are, because if you have children, like I say, who may be in GCSE year, or you know, who have big exams coming up, it does make it trickier. But I think trying to focus on, okay, I'm not going to try and recreate a classroom in my house. I'm not going to try and position myself as a teacher. You know, we have had so much uncertainty, I think, and that's been really the case for children. You know, they've been taken out of school at short notice. They're missing their friends. They're missing their teachers. I don't think they need a teacher right now. I think they need a parent right now. And this is why the first chapter in my book, I talk about relationships and how we can build a strong, loving relationship with our children, and how we can kind of, you know, utilize all the tips in our parenting toolboxes so that we can really support our children to go through challenging moments. Because I think that it's going to be really difficult to try and hold both hats. Especially when, you know, we're trying to, it's a really difficult thing to do, I think, to both be at home but still trying to follow instructions from school. You know, there's a reason schoolwork works in school, and you know, teachers are used to dealing with classes of 30 children, and they're very good at doing that as well. But I think taking these ideas of learning from school, you know, maybe it's worksheets or computer-based learning or doing a project, and translating those to home where children are naturally going to feel more relaxed, you know, their toys are around them, the TV's there, the garden's there maybe. I think that's a really difficult situation, and it's not something homeschoolers do. You know, we don't actually sit our children down for 8 hours a day in a classroom or at a desk, because I think many homeschoolers choose to homeschool particularly because they don't want that for their children. So I think allowing yourself permission, rather than getting into battles with your children around doing the maths sheets that the school has sent, maybe it's about having a compromise. You do one question from the math sheet together. Maybe you pick the trickiest one and you work through it together, so you really have a sense that they've understood it. And then maybe you do something fun. And I think we forget that so much of what we learn in school has to be done through textbooks or worksheets, because you've got 30 kids and you're in a classroom, but we at home get to bring that into practical daily life. So we can teach maths by doing baking with our kids. Oh, this recipe will make 12 cookies, but we want to make 18 cookies, so what do we need to do with the ingredients? Or maybe rather than sitting down and reading a passage of a certain book, maybe you're reading your kids' favorite books, or maybe you're reading the books you love to them. I've seen families who are reading comic books together or reading poetry together. You can watch documentaries with them. If you've got a kid who loves dinosaurs or ancient Egypt, this is the perfect time to really dive deep into those interests. And I think trying to remember, okay, what's the big picture? Beyond the spelling worksheets, beyond the maths tasks and challenges, what is school trying to do? What's the fundamental purpose of education? It's a big question. But for me, it's about, do we raise children who love learning? Do we raise children who have a desire to work things out for themselves, who have the capacity to ask questions and stay curious and kind of find out about the world around them? And to me, this is what parents are expert at being able to do. Yes, we might not be able to teach a class of 30 specific grammar rules, but actually we can really ignite that sense of natural curiosity and wonder that our children are born with. We don't teach our children how to walk. We don't teach our children how to talk. We don't teach our children when they make their first joke. I think we forget that children are inherently superb at learning. This is what makes them the incredible humans that they are. And I think then when children go to school, we often forget that actually they can learn just fine by themselves as well. So if possible, if it's a real challenge, I would say chat to your teacher, say, I'm sorry, but we just aren't able to do all of these worksheets at the moment, and throw yourself into doing things that you really will enjoy with your children. Because relationship comes first. And actually, what you don't want to be doing is just further eroding that interest in learning, when actually you have a whole set of new exciting things you can be doing together at home. And I think so this is why I wanted to talk about this first, because I think this ties really neatly into a question of, well, what do I mean by peaceful parenting? Does it mean less shouting? And for me, peaceful parenting is a way of saying, a way of parenting which has your relationship with your child at its heart. So I think we see a lot of what I might call kind of mainstream parenting advice, which talks about timeouts and naughty steps and praise and rewards and punishments. And for me, I can understand why parents, and I think a lot of schools as well, end up falling back on these methods. But what I've seen in my own parenting with my daughter, but also in the work that I have done with families and clients around the world, is that it's not the only way of parenting, and that although it requires a bit of digging deep into ourselves and our own childhoods and our own motivations, there is a way to be with your children which doesn't focus on control, but actually focuses on, okay, how do we work as a team? How do we build connection with our children, rather than shaming them when we do something wrong? How do we try and understand their behavior instead? So it takes as its starting point the idea that all of our children's behavior is a form of communication, essentially. And that's the same whether they're 2 or whether they're 20. So a 2-year-old who is throwing a tantrum, screaming on the floor of a supermarket, or a 5-year-old who loses their temper and whacks their sibling. Yes, these aren't, these are frustrating situations for us as parents. This isn't about being saints, but it's about understanding that actually our children are fundamentally good. They fundamentally want to do a good job. They don't want to hurt or upset us or their siblings or anyone they love. But for sometimes being a child, life is really, really, really hard. They don't have the impulse control we have, and actually studies have shown that our brain doesn't reach full maturity until the age of around 25. So expecting, a 2, 3, 4-year-old, or even a 10, 12-year-old to have the same kind of capacity to respond reasonably and calmly when they're feeling overwhelmed, I think is just, it doesn't make sense from a neurological perspective. So what peaceful parenting tries to do is really look at, okay, what is developmentally appropriate for our children? And rather than responding to challenging behavior with threats or punishments, which might work in the short term, but might have a damaging, or kind of eroding sense of self-worth when our children get older, how do we instead try to work on ourselves as parents so that we can respond with empathy and compassion and kindness, just in the same way that, if I'm having a terrible day and I lose my cool, and I snap at my husband, rather than him going, oh, you're such a, bad wife, get out of the room, I don't want to talk to you. Hopefully, he's going to reply and say, oh, I can see that you've had a really tough day, darling. You sound really exhausted. Are you okay? And it's the same with our children. It's not to say that we're going to let our kids draw all over the walls, or that we're just going to sit there and say, oh, darling, when they hit their sibling. Of course not. We still need to keep people safe. But it's about, rather than responding through kind of shame-based parenting methods, like asking them to leave a room or telling them they're naughty, really trying to respond in love and compassion and trying to see past that behavior to what might be going on for them. And again, this is something I talk about extensively in chapter 1 of Extraordinary Parenting, and I kind of liken it to an iceberg, whereas you might have the challenging behavior at the top, whether it's shouts at a sibling or refuses to do schoolwork, but then under the water you have so many different things. Maybe your child is hungry or thirsty, or they're feeling stressed or lonely, or maybe they've got bigger, maybe there's parental divorce in the picture, maybe there's illness, maybe there's just a sense of, your brain not quite catching up with where you are developmentally. So it's a kind of catch-all phrase, I think, for parenting that tries to understand our children's behavior and motivations and needs, and tries to see them as a holistic person, rather than parenting which focuses on behavioral issues, which I think is, again, very common, in parenting books. It's how to potty train, or how to get your child to eat, or how to stop your child doing a certain thing, how to get your child to listen or to comply. And so it's about trying to see the bigger picture, which I think until quite recently was still pretty niche in terms of parenting, but I'm really heartened to see that there have been so many books recently. Dan Siegel has written some amazing parenting books based on his work on brain development. There have been people like Dr. Laura Markham who have written really successful books. Here in the UK, we have Sarah Ockwell-Smith, who's written some really popular books around kind of gentle parenting. So I feel heartened that this is starting to become more popular as a way of kind of parenting and connecting with our children. But I think we probably still have a long way to go as well. But, no parent is perfect. I have to admit, lose my temper from time to time. And it's not about aiming for perfection. I can't stress that enough. It's about aiming for, can we be compassionate to ourselves? Can we be compassionate to our children? And can we do our best? And I think that's something we do have in our power.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know that I've got friends that have adopted, and they it's very similar to they do therapeutic parenting.
Yeah,
it's along the same. So it's kind of acknowledging whatever that behaviour is, but digging deep and thinking about, well, what does that actually mean? What is that behaviour?
Yes.
Going. I was a behaviour support teacher for a little while, and I learned so much doing the training for that. I've been teaching for a long time, but when I did that, I said, I think every teacher and every parent should do this for a bit, because it makes you start to understand the choices that children make, and sometimes, and the fact that they're not choices necessarily. It's a knee-jerk reaction to something, but us as adults shouldn't have the same knee-jerk reaction back.
Yes.
It's hard. It's
yes.
really hard. Sometimes you're like, but so making that conscious decision as a grown-up not to respond in the same way as your child would is difficult.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we can be so hypocritical as parents. I think often we expect higher self-control and higher levels of behavioral standards with our, our tiny children than we do for ourselves as well. So it's definitely about modeling the behavior we want to see in our children rather than a kind of do as I say, not do as I do type parenting. But it is hard.
It is. I haven't got any other questions coming in. Moment. I really liked that what you said about the fact that children are inherently superb at learning. I wrote that down. I think that is so true, and you don't think about that. They just because they're sponges, aren't they? They pick up all of these things. It's got nothing to do with us. Our child is going to learn to walk and talk and feed itself with a spoon and all those things without us sitting them down and having a really formalized way of teaching them. So, and I'd never really thought about that before in terms of like longer term of when the child's older. And you're so right. I think as us as human beings, we like to learn. We want to find things out and for ourselves, and people learn in different ways.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely. There's an amazing set of essays by somebody called Carol Black, which you can find online, and she talks about unschooling. So that's a kind of, I guess it's more towards the spectrum of quite radical homeschooling, where you don't really teach children anything in terms of kind of formal top-down education, but you wait for them to be interested. And it's not neglectful. You still give your children lots of opportunities, and you have lots of books and materials and things, but you're not going to say, right, you're 5, so it's time to teach you how to read and write. You're waiting for your child's natural interest, and it's about giving children that space. And what's so interesting is that she talks about, well, how do we learn as adults? When you first got your laptop or your computer, did you go to a class, or did you have like a computer teacher? Probably not. When I first got my iPhone, I didn't go to a seminar on how to use it. I maybe Googled it, I maybe fiddled about with it, but mostly I kind of, I did trial and error, and I played about with it, and I talked to my husband, oh, how does this work? And kids are the same. I think we forget that actually children are humans, which sounds really obvious, but just in the same way that, if I'm interested in something, I talk to someone about it, or I pick up a book, or I try and practice it. And, if I've, like everyone else in lockdown, I've also been learning how to make sourdough. And, I didn't go to a class. I just, you fiddle about with it, and you learn and you practice, and you understand what works for you. And I think, it's the same way with, as we said, with little children, when you see them learning how to do something for the first time, that focus and concentration of, I'm going to try, oh, I did it. And I think we forget that children are, inherently capable of being interested and of learning things. But it's interesting because so few children, relatively speaking, even now, are home educated. We don't kind of, again, an oft-used analogy in unschooling is that you don't see children in the wild. You only see children as they are in schools, but you don't really see what children and children's development would be like if they weren't in classroom settings. So it's really interesting. But there's been more studies now looking at children who, for example, have been home educated or unschooled. And I think, there is definitely a strong, compelling evidence for children definitely still learning to read and write and do maths, even when they don't have anybody formally teaching them. It's really cool.
Thank you. Right, so we've got a couple of things. So Joe says, that was brilliant. My 7-year-old often picks me up on how I tell my wild 4-year-old off, saying, I don't think that's the best way to do this, Mum. And yeah, I get told that. Sarah's asked a really interesting question. She said, could you talk a bit about homeschooling and feminism? She said, something that's always really fascinated me about your parenting philosophy. I'd always associated homeschooling with a more traditional outlook. I heard you explain how radical it can be. So would you mind?
What an amazing question. Yes, please.
Really good question. Go on to Sarah.
So I would say, before I kind of talk explicitly about homeschooling, I think that in general, there is such an interesting question around kind of, I think, more hands-on parenting. Maybe that looks like attachment parenting. Maybe it looks like not going back to work straight away, and feminism. And I think there's an amazing book, which I really cannot recommend highly enough. It's called Liberating Motherhood, Birthing the Purple Stocking Movement, by somebody called Vanessa Olorenshaw. And I felt that when I read that, she really put into words so much of what I was feeling as a young mother who had decided to not return to her proper job. I used to be a senior press officer in a government department. So very different to what I do now. And I decided I didn't want to go back. I just wanted to stay with my baby. And I think, you know, that can be seen in the context of, I think we live, I'm going to get political here, I think we live in a very kind of capitalist patriarchy. And I think that a lot of feminism now, you know, if we look at kind of Sheryl Sandberg, lean in style feminism, a lot of feminism, I think, has been about how do we get women to where men are? How do we smash the glass ceiling? How do we get as much free childcare as possible, as early as possible, so that women can return to work and catch up with their careers just like men are? And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for that. I think obviously having equality in the workplace, being able to be paid the same amount as men for the jobs we do and so on is vitally important. But I think that this brand of what I think Vanessa Laurential calls a kind of capitalist feminism misses is the fact that actually for so many mothers, we want to look after our babies. I've spoken to so many mothers who didn't want to go back to work but had to or felt pressured to. And I think that we have systematically devalued mothering and caring tasks for probably millennia, you know, because it's seen as women's work. And of course, we know that if you live in a patriarchy, women's work is not valued. And we see that now, you know, I mean, you're a teacher, you've seen how much teachers get paid for the amount of work teachers do. We've seen how much nursery staff get paid. I think in the UK, the average nursery worker earns about £9 an hour, which, considering you're spending all day on your feet surrounded by young children, you know, it's disgraceful. And so many caring jobs, you know, we've seen now with coronavirus, the people who are working in care homes, you know, it's often women, it's often people who are perhaps in more disadvantaged backgrounds. So this is a long-winded way of saying, I think caring tasks have been devalued and seen as something which, you know, if you're in any way privileged, you try and ship out to people who have, you know, fewer privileges than you do, so that you can get back to doing the important work of contributing to the economy. And I think that for me, there is something deeply radical and powerful about saying that I don't care if I'm contributing to the economy, but this work matters. And I can't honestly think of many works, many jobs, many careers or vocations that are as important as raising the next generation of children. And I think we can extend that to homeschooling and say educating the next generation of children as well. You know, we know from fantastic research that those early years of our children matter profoundly in terms of how children are raised to be, you know, how children develop, how children's brains grow, how children feel in themselves, how children act as adults. And yet, you know, we take children in those really precious early years of their lives and we tell women, oh, well, that doesn't matter. Go back to work, contribute, pay your taxes, you know, be an upstanding member of society. So I think there is something still that feels very radical about saying, you know what, I'm opting out of this partly or fully, or at least, you know, I don't want to be a part of this, even if we still have to because we need to pay bills. And I think that, you know, yes, I think there is in some strands of home education still this sense of, you know, this is the woman's task, and, you know, this is you know, I think that is what it is. But for me, it feels like a very feminist act to be able to educate my daughter myself and to say, I don't want the state to educate my daughter, actually. I would quite like to teach her. I'd quite like to teach my daughter feminist philosophy. I'd like to teach my daughter, you know, as we were talking about earlier, I'd like to read anti-racist books with her. I'd like to diversify the, you know, the curriculums we read together. It feels like a really political act to say, actually, we want something better for children. And I think it depends how you do it as well. You know, we've been really fortunate in that my husband is able to work flexibly. So my husband is also, you know, right from when she's been little, he works 4 days a week or sometimes 3.5 days a week, so that he's able to be involved with that as well. And I'm still able to work. So I think, you know, that is an added bonus as well, that she doesn't just see parenting and caregiving and educating as a woman's job. And I think, you know, if it was possible, we would probably like to do half and half. But at the moment, with the job my husband does, it's not possible. But I certainly think that actually spending time with our children can be a deeply, you know, feminist, radical act. I think it's, yeah, it feels very empowering, and it feels like an exciting thing to be able to do as well, to be able to have that impact on, yeah, the generation that comes up after us. So that was probably a very overly impassioned argument, but I really do recommend the book Liberating Motherhood. It's really excellent. And you know, there are other books out there. There's one called Radical Homemaking. Yeah, there are lots of interesting books if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I'll stop talking about that now. I feel like I could go on forever.
I don't think you need to stop. No, it's great. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. There are no more questions coming in at the moment. John has said, sorry, I have to put the kids to bed now.
Thank you for listening, John.
He will be getting your book tomorrow.
Oh, very exciting.
Very exciting. So yes, I shall be ordering them. Well, they are on order to come into the bookshop as we speak, which is great. So I mean, as I said to you as well before we went live, the kind of a home education community in Brentwood seems to be growing and thriving. And I've found, from kind of an almost like an outsider's point of view, that it is a very supportive work. So I mean, I would say that if it's something that you want to dip your toe into, then there is quite a lot of support out there, but definitely do your research first. I would say, and kind of look at what the options are. I've also found that quite a few schools have actually been very supportive of parents that have made that choice. I'm talking about parents that have been, you know, where their children have been in school and have made the decision to move away from it for whatever reason. And that's been really heartening actually to see. And I've been really, it's made me really happy to see that schools have gone, do you know what? Yeah, if that's what you want to try, then great, but we're here for you if you need us. I think that's amazing. And that's hopefully a way forward for people that, like you were saying, is there an opportunity to possibly be more flexible in the way that we educate our children, and that we can make that a more holistic experience, you know, across the board. That's been really good to see.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I think, you know, one of my dreams for the kind of society I'd like to live in is, you know, more kind of true community-based education where, yeah, maybe your kid goes to school a day a week or 2 days a week, and then maybe you take some of the local kids to share one of your skills with them. And, you know, I think that the home education community has so much to offer a more traditional school community. But I think it goes both ways as well. You know, I've seen people say, if only, you know, maybe at weekends we could have access to science labs, or we could have access to playing fields and things like that. So I would really, really love to see more dialogue and kind of cooperation between schools and homeschooling communities. I think we don't need to be at war. We want the same thing, which is for children to be happy and to thrive and to learn. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. And there's been quite a few schools around here doing the forest school as well. So that's a nice bridge, kind of almost in between, where they're looking. It always makes me kind of smile a little bit because I'm old. So, you know, I went to school before national curriculum. So we had, you know, the nature table, and our teachers did take us out and do things. I mean, the downside of it was, if you went to a very small school like I did, if you had the same teacher more than once, you pretty much did the same thing. So my poor sister did ancient Egypt 3 times, because that's what her teacher was interested in, and that's who she got. So there was definitely, you know, swings and roundabouts. But I do remember my teachers being genuinely passionate about what they taught me, because it was their thing. It was so whatever you found out about, and I did feel like it was quite often more child-led, so you had more opportunities to ask questions and to go off on a bit of a tangent. And that's not against teachers at all. It's not teachers' fault. It's not the school's fault either. That's the situation that schools have been put into with a very strict curriculum. But there are ways and means around it, I think. And, you know, the best teachers, the ones that have the best impact, are the ones that can tweak a little bit to make it still fit how the children in their class learn and thrive. So it's But I agree with you completely. I think if there could be any way that those two worlds could to connect a bit more, that would be perfect, wouldn't it?
It really would. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I think we have kind of come to a natural end because no one else is asking any questions because you've answered them so well. It's great.
I do love
to apologise.
But what I can do as well is I will make sure that I'm following your page on Facebook. And if anyone wants to leave any comments, I will check in a couple of days so that I can, if you've got any specific questions, I'm really happy to answer them as well. And you can also find me on Instagram at Mighty Mother. And then, if you want to ask me any questions, I am there and really happy to ask. So, and I also have a free Facebook group called A Beautiful Childhood, which has loads of really kind of experienced home educators and non-home educating parents as well. So you're very welcome to join if you want some specific advice on things like home educating as well. I'll be happy to help you.
Oh, hang on a second. Sorry, something else is just coming in from Joe. So Joe, you need to finish your question because you finished mid-sentence. I'll read out the beginning bit of it. So it is, she's concerned about sending children back to school. Oh, there's the rest of it. Not because I'm overly worried about them becoming ill. I'm really concerned about the effect of social distancing in school. Yeah, and on relationships.
Yeah, I think it depends on how your school is doing it. I think you need to talk to the teachers about how they're doing it. I know that some have made kind of bubbles so that the children are able to not socialise with as many people, but still have friendships where there's no social distancing within those bubbles. Because I think, especially with young children, it's just impossible. You can't get young children to socially distance. I think it would be cruel and unnatural, and I think schools know that. But I also think, I don't know your situation and, if you work outside the home or not or anything like that. But, I also know lots of people who have decided not to send their children back until September because they are, like you say, not desperately concerned about their kids getting ill, but just feel like it would be a strange transition to go from school to no school to suddenly being in a kind of halfway house where you have some kids and then the summer break and then school again. So I think you have to follow your gut and do what's right for you. I think a lot of schools have been amazing in being really, open with their communities about what they're able to do. But I think, think about what works best for your family as well. But obviously you have to weigh up all the pros and cons. I think if you decide to send your child back to school, be aware that, like we were talking about in terms of kind of peaceful parenting, you might find yourself in a position where actually your child is maybe struggling a little bit with their behavior as they're processing some of these things. So have it in your mind that, you might find that you're having more, frustrating behavior or tantrums or shouting or rudeness, and just holding that more lightly, I think. And then also, if your child is feeling particularly anxious or worried, there are some fantastic books. I'm sure Natasha will be able to recommend lots of lovely books on feelings. So having some nice books to kind of work through part of that anxiety and worry as well with them. But just really giving them that space to, share how they're feeling with you and being that safe haven for them. Giving them lots of kind of calm around evenings and weekends, just space to kind of play and process, and they'll be fine. They've got a caring mum who wants their best for them. So they're going to be all right no matter what you do.
Oh, that's a lovely answer. Thank you. I mean, I think it's such a personal decision, isn't it? We've made the decision. I mean, two of ours are, grown-ups, but Max is 13, so he's year 8, and we've already made the decision that if his school chose to send them back, which doesn't look like they're going to anyway, that actually we wouldn't, because we didn't feel that it would. We thought that the cons outweighed the pros. He's missing his friends a lot, but we can't guarantee that he'd be in those bubbles anyway. And the fact that he's older means that he's at least virtually seeing them, even though he's not physically seeing them. We just felt that it was emotionally a better decision for him to wait, hopefully, until September when things level out. But I think it's got to be a completely personal decision for each family. There's no right or wrong, is there? It's just whatever works for you.
Yeah, and no judgment on anyone who chooses to send their kids back or who doesn't choose to send their kids back. You just have to do what's right for your family. I also know lots of families who are sending their kids back, and if that's what works for you, then that's fine as well. But I think it's one of those decisions where ultimately whatever you do, it will be okay, as long as, you know, they have a loving, supportive family to come home to at the end of the day. So yeah, it feels like a big decision now, but it probably won't in 6 months or a year.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for this evening, and thank you for putting up with my terrible tech skills.
It's been an absolute joy. Thank you for having me. It's been really enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you to everyone that joined us on Facebook Live as well, and bore with me while I was faffing around with pressing the wrong buttons probably. So as I say, we are going to have Eloise's book in the shop. Hopefully within the next couple of days it will arrive. And we're here to, you know this already, but we're here to support parents however we can as well, whether that's just a chat on the phone or an email going but thank you very much, Eloise. I wish you huge success with the book. I can't wait to get it in my hands and share it with people.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I got my copy yesterday, so it was very exciting.
Oh, it is exciting. It's really exciting. So yeah, thank you very much, and hopefully we might be book number 2. Do you think maybe?
I have already had a chat with my agent about it, so I'll hopefully be working on a proposal over the summer.
Fabulous. That was the right answer. Thank you so much. Have you got any last words you would like to say before I?
No, that's lovely. It's just been a real joy to come on and chat, and thank you very much for your questions. And yeah, just remember that you're doing a fantastic job. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you.